When we return, we'll learn more about managing this painful condition. Welcome back. I want to welcome you back. And when we were at our break, I had mentioned kind of at a personal level, wondering about shyness and whether you had ever struggled with this yourself. I mean, on camera, you seem so competent and like you have mastered this. And I'm wondering if that might be an illusion. I don't know.
Well, where I still struggle with it is if I'm at a conference giving a paper and I've got 500 to 1,000 people in the audience, that still makes me very nervous. So mine comes out in public speaking anxiety. I like working with small groups.
Okay.
I'm not so accustomed to television that I don't notice now that my words are coming out rather haltingly.
Okay.
Yeah.
So part of it is...
I hadn't noticed. Your skill set is better than
me. See, there we go. Perfect example.
But stage fright really is a variety of shyness.
Oh, sure. And like you said, it really does depend perhaps on the setting. In a small group, you might be quite comfortable, and in a larger group, or perhaps in your office, one-on-one, you could probably chat all afternoon.
Well, and that's the thing that's important about it, is because often what people don't recognize is that it's usually unfamiliar situations for most people that might create some feelings of shyness. The question is whether or not you get stuck and avoid them. Because some of the research suggests that people who are shy don't actually experience anything very much different than people who label themselves as non-shy. They think there's something wrong with it, and they tend to label themselves, and it's partly that self-labeling process that makes them withdraw more.
So again, an internal picture of a shy person comes to mind, and then I get frozen.
I know for myself, when I began work at the clinic, I began immediately to register rather uncomfortably the degree to which I'd shaped my life to avoid certain sorts of situations which elicited the shy response in me. And very often when we speak to clients about how might you exert yourself, push yourself a little more this week, what is some situation that you habitually avoid, they'll be at a loss to come up with something. Whereas, in fact, when we look a little more closely, we'll discover that there are innumerable areas in which they're constraining themselves.
And there probably are for many of us. The difference is, does it interfere with what you want to do? I mean, if somebody doesn't want to be a television performer or a public speaker, then it's never going to be an issue.
Right.
But where it's a heartbreaking issue is often in things like dating anxiety, where people really don't feel that they can get a date or are very afraid of approaching someone, and the fear gets greater and greater until they get more and more isolated. So it's a real joy to see someone like that find out that not only can they role play the situation in the group, but they can go on beyond that.
Sure.
As a matter of fact, you mentioned visualization earlier, and you're thinking of visualization in terms of dating anxiety, too.
We're hoping to incorporate some visualization, self-hypnosis into a dating anxiety workshop.
I noticed that was one of the techniques in the studying I did to prepare for this show. They talked a lot about being able to use that sort of gradual desensitization kind of models for treatment, which actually made a great deal of sense to me, that you know, you kind of get used to it a little bit at a time.
Although now, primarily in the groups, we focus on a lot of what they call simulated exposures, or where people don't imagine the situation, they actually do it. Because I think they get better results faster. But where we're thinking about using visualization now is also just visualizing themselves in very positive ways at the same time that they're doing the exposures.
Okay, so and that would address that kind of internal reality that
Yeah.
you're
Exactly.
talking about.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Now, one of the books, and it may even be Conquering Shyness, I know one of the authors referred to this kind of pseudo-extrovertism, and I immediately thought of myself, which is this idea of having
Carol
those
Burnett.
feelings, having those feelings and then plowing forward
Right.
anyway. And so that my external reality is that people would often assume that I'm comfortable in situations that internally I would really rather not do. But that's sort of, well, but we simply must do it, so
Right.
you do it.
And that's often how people say that they've overcome shyness, is doing exactly what you're saying. I've had newspaper reporters say to me, my gosh, I was shy, and then I found that I had to interview people, and the more I've done it, the less shy I am. And it often doesn't mean that you never get the discomfort.
That's right.
It just doesn't get in your way.
That's
You do
right.
it anyway. And then it gets easier the more you do it.
Although that's not always a stable solution, in the sense that sometimes people who have operated on that principle then find that they feel there's something missing, they feel somehow that it's a performance.
And in that case, often those people have more difficulty sharing their real selves
The intimacy.
and intimate situations, because they begin to feel that they have to wear the mask all the time and that people expect them to wear the mask. And that's one of the reasons at the clinic that we don't over-focus. When we use a social fitness model, we're not looking for perfect social performers. I mean, people can go to acting classes for that.
That's true.
What we're looking for is facilitating just the ordinary kinds of human connection where people don't have to be perfect. And that really is helpful, I think, to this, what Phil originally called the shy extrovert.
Yes.
Someone who can perform but feels uncomfortable, but then has the sense that it's not safe to show the real self. And when the real self comes out in group and everybody enjoys it, they find, oh, well, this is okay.
Well, and also over time, you could very easily lose track of who that other self is.
That's
I mean,
quite
you
true.
become your
Yeah.
performance, and
That's
I
quite
imagine that it probably takes some sort of life crisis or perhaps a primary relationship that begins to fall apart to really get somebody's attention and say, you know, hello, maybe there's another issue here.
In some cases, I think that's really the case.
Right.
Although we've had people tell us that they've always known that they had this mask and they've always wanted to work on it, and finally they just get tired of it and
You're right,
do
it's
it.
the cumulative
Yeah.
lack of satisfying
Yeah.
Okay.
relating.
And well, and it also sounds like socially connecting, I mean, it does take energy.
Yes.
You know,
Yes.
I mean, the whole idea is, you know, well, it takes energy to avoid it. It also takes energy to do it. And I guess it's a matter of, you know, which way you want to use your energy.
Well, and go ahead.
Go ahead.
The shy person often imagines that for other people it doesn't take energy.
That's the fantasy.
Yeah.
That it
That others
shouldn't.
have some kind
Yeah.
of rule book with which
Right.
they're well acquainted, and it's effortless.
Right.
Whereas for them, it's the fact that it's effortful in itself seems shameful.
Right.
Okay, that's an important word, shame.
Well, that's
Very.
the subject of my research, because as I was working with the groups, what I found out was that they got the feeling that came up, the affect that came up a lot in group was shame. That if a social situation doesn't work out, they blame themselves. If it does work out, they give the other person credit. They don't
okay.
take credit, and because of this self-blaming, what we call attribution style, they often develop a real negative bias in the self-concept, what we call self-concept distortions.
Okay.
And they organize a lot of incoming information. So if I've got a negative belief about myself and I'm not terribly aware of it, I can have a lot of social successes, and as soon as I hit a bump, I'll think, oh, well, see, I
Yeah.
can't do that. That's just how I am.
Yeah.
So we work a lot with the self-blaming part and the self-concept distortions of the clinic, because I think they're essential to address.
Well, and it sounds like a lot of that may also come from kind of the cognitive model of overgeneralizing. I mean, one of the, I know, cognitive traps that we often fall into is sort of, well, if I don't do this perfectly, then I must be a total failure, or,
That's right.
you know, I didn't have a good time on this date, so I should never date again.
Right.
Right.
Although they don't recognize the implications of overgeneralization nearly as much as they will identify with this tendency to blame the self
Okay.
if anything goes wrong.
Okay.
And if they come to you and they're doing their homework and they're doing a good job, and they're often giving credit to other people or the situations, what does that do to their motivation? It's a real motivation factor,
Well,
even
and
in the groups.
It also creates a tremendous amount of dependence on external reinforcement.
Exactly.
Which is, you know, I better be around people who like me all the time,
Right.
or I'm going to.
As soon as
Go
I
back
get the
to that.
negative, then I'll get the old belief about the self.
Sure.
And I better behave in such a way that people like me all the time.
Yes. I better be pleasant and
Which
sweet and
limits life.
accommodating.
Indeed.
Right.
Indeed.
And makes it very hard to say no or ask for what you want. That's why originally when Phil Zimbardo started the clinic, they had that particular focus on assertiveness training at the end.
Okay.
Because it's very hard sometimes when you've learned to be accommodating, to say no.
Well, and the reality is that people often don't appreciate it when you learn boundaries. I mean, I
Right.
know my own
That's right.
experience, or when I work with clients, you know, when they begin to set some limits, the people around them don't go, oh, that's great.
Yeah,
You're learning
good
to
for
say
you.
no.
Right.
You know, I mean,
I want you to do that job.
That's right.
Right.
That's right. They start to push back. And so
Right.
I think part of that assertiveness
Yeah.
has to do with preparing them for the reaction to that.
Sure.
Plus the fact that we pretty specifically have people as they're doing their behavioral homework during the week, because they practice these situations in their own lives and have specific goals, is that we have them reward themselves either with tokens or food or something they like or activities that they really enjoy doing, but often they have trouble rewarding themselves because we're trying to keep the rewards in their own hands. Rather, if someone's in a bad mood, then they can say, well, that was a negative social outcome. But if they did their homework and they reward themselves for it, whatever happens doesn't matter.
Okay.
They did their homework.
So
they get the credit. So
less outcome on outcome, and less focus on outcome and more focus on process. The fact that I showed up, I did what I committed myself to do.
Exactly.
That's what matters.
Exactly. And
Okay.
process very specifically from the point of view, if you do your homework, you've done it, and
Yeah.
you can reward yourself. Because you can't ever control other people's moods.
Absolutely.
But you can sure control your homework behavior, and that's what's going to pay off in the long run.
You know, there's also, it strikes me, a level of, and I know for myself, there's a level of grandiosity in the sense of, I am the center of the universe, so everyone's watching what I'm doing all the time, and if I say something stupid, everyone in the world will notice. And, you know, part of my own healing process around this has been to find, much to my chagrin, that in fact, people often aren't paying attention.
Yeah.
And when I walk in the room, they don't notice. And,
Right.
and
And that's a huge
there's-
relief.
There is, and
Yeah.
there's the relief that accompanies that, oh, okay, you know, I have spinach on my teeth and maybe only you notice.
Right.
But in truth, we're all just muddling along and
Really?
we're playing around trying to figure out what works best for us.
That's
and
right.
we're about letting people do that. That's
And we have the saying at the clinic, bumble freely. I
Yes,
mean, that's
okay.
basically what we're looking for, is not people who expect themselves to be perfect social performers, because those people often scare other people away.
Yeah, they might, huh? Because of the
they-
smoothness,
Yeah.
or they seem so competent.
They're technicians.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
And if someone's naturally very gregarious, that's fine, but they often expect themselves to be perfect. And if they're attractive and trying very hard to be perfect and being very careful, they're often seen as snobbish and aloof too, when they're not necessarily.
Oh, that's a very good
Yeah.
point. In fact, a lot of times I've known people who see themselves as shy, who other people describe as arrogant.
Yes.
Yes.
You know,
Exactly.
and part of that is because I think for survival skills, for a lot of people who struggle with this issue,
You
could be to intellectualize. I mean, I'm going to, you know, be in my books. I'm going to do my research. I'm going to, you know, be very smart, and I don't have to worry about being scared because,
Right.
Right.
you know,
There's
I'm
an
hiding.
aloof, distant stance, which
Sure.
gets taken for arrogance or anger. Or,
Sure. And so part of what you're talking about, before we close, see if I understand this, is part of the being willing to bumble has to do with the intimacy.
Yes.
Which is, you know, that intimacy is about taking off that, and you get to see me warts and all, but both my successes and my failures.
Well, even people in public life who don't try to present themselves as perfect, but who are genuine, who acknowledge when they make a mistake, who, I mean, we tend to identify most, I think, with people we see as basically competent, but not necessarily perfect.
But not perfect. I want to
Yeah.
thank you both so much for joining me tonight. I appreciate it. Thank you for being with us. Join us next week as we take a look at sleeping disorders. I'm Mary Crocker Cook. Good night.